it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Nyborg, one of the real kind of moving forces behind the development of platform studies over a number of years now. And as anybody kind of moves into the platform studies area, you can't help but bumping in to David Nyborg's work, either in terms of the very productive number of articles that he writes, and which also that he co-writes. It's really nice to see him co-authoring with so many different authors, and I think that's a testament to the fact that he's just generally, from my having got to know him over the last 2 years, he's just a pleasant guy, easy to hang around with, get to know, and a pleasure to kind of talk with and to joust with. He's got that Dutch sentiment, he tells me, where you can say it as it is, you can be frank, and you can go to the mat if you want to, and then you get up, brush yourself off, and David's right there, ready to still be your friend. So I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate the contributions that he's making to the field. A little bit about David before I turn it over to the floor. He is from the Netherlands, as I said. He did his work, his PhD in media studies at the University of Amsterdam, and he's held visiting and fellowship appointments at MIT, Utrecht University, the Queensland University of Technology, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's now currently an assistant professor at the Media Studies in the Department of Arts, Culture, and Media at the University of Toronto, and with a graduate appointment at the iSchool. Where he maintains a very active research agenda, including working with one of our alumnus. I'd like to just point out Lian Rui Jia, who I noticed earlier has entered into the room. So it's always nice to see our graduates go on and do great things, and it's nice to see them go on and do great things with somebody like David, and these kinds of very productive collegial intellectual endeavors. So that's great. Last couple of things I'll just say here is that David has a co-authored book that is coming down the pipes, should be out in, I'm guessing 6 months to a year. It's co-authored with Thomas Pohl and Brooke Aaron Duffy, and it's called Platforms in Cultural Production, and the publisher is Polity Press. I had a pleasure of getting a sneak peek of an advanced copy in manuscript form, and I think you guys are going to love it. So watch for that to land in the next year or so. All right. Many in this department will know, in our department anyway, will know of Professor Nyborg's work from, I'm sure, my colleagues' classes. I use 2 pieces in my Comtech and Society course, and I just know that students really delved into the work and enjoyed engaging with it. It was very, very fruitful contribution to the class, and we really all learned something from that. So I am going to now fade into the woodwork, turn the mic over to David. But before that, big welcome for Professor Nyborg.
Thank you. I have to ask the obligatory question. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Wow, thanks so much for those kind words, Dwayne. I'm happy this is recorded. I'm gonna cut this out, and every next lecture I'll do at U of T, I'll start with this, and I make my students listen to it. I'm only half joking. Blue, also thank you so much for all the work you've done behind the scenes and making this much easier for me. So I appreciate that. Thank you all for coming. Of course, I wish we could be together. The upside is that I can do a keynote in pajama pants, which is sort of life goal, one of my life goals. So that's great. And in case you're wondering what's that behind me, that's the flag of Amsterdam. So I don't know if somebody won a bet or lost a bet right now, but that's what's going on behind me. I'm going to talk about some research, and all the PDFs I'm going to talk about today are in an online folder. So if you go to bit.ly and then all lowercase CCGC 2021, you'll find the PDFs, these slides if you're interested, and a cat picture. I locked my cat up, but she will be with you if you follow this link. What I want to do today, I think I have like 30 minutes or something like that, and I'm gonna talk you through some of my research, and then after that we're going to do this Q&A. And this is my guiding question: what happens if might be even better, but what happens when cultural production becomes platform dependent? So I'm going to flesh this out. So this stuff, I'm going to talk about this question: what happens when cultural production becomes platform dependent? We set this out a couple of years ago. This is one of the first outputs. I'm working together with this Professor Poole from the University of Amsterdam. So it started sort of here. We did 2 special issues or special collections for Social Media and Society, like 26 papers roughly. So these are places where we really fleshed out this framework we've been working on. In case you're interested, one of these special issues focuses more on the practices question, and the other special issue focuses more on the methods question. This is the book Dwayne has been talking about. It is sort of a special moment because last night, this is true, I'm not making this up, we submitted the final manuscript to the publisher. So yeah, fresh from the Neil press. And it should come out hopefully this calendar year. That would be fantastic, but let's see, don't want to jinx anything. So I'm just highlighting this to give you a sense of where this project is coming from, and again, who we've been working with, because I don't want to take full ownership of most of this material. So, okay, let's get back to this question: what happens when cultural production becomes platform dependent? And before I flesh out these key terms, I want to give you a little bit of context and flavor. What do I mean when I say cultural production, to give you sort of 3 brief vignettes to dive into this broader question. First, something that is near and dear to my heart: digital games. Not so much games, but digital games. And the question with games: what happens if games become platform dependent, is sort of a moot question, because digital games have always been platform dependent. You cannot play a digital game without a platform. You need a PlayStation, you need an Xbox, you need a phone or a device, you need something, a platform, typically a hardware platform, increasingly a software platform, Facebook, but you need that. So that for me has always been, and in the literature, a good case study, games in the game industry, because most of the interesting, relevant questions, particularly in terms of economics, sort of emerge when you're talking about the games industry. In the book, we talk about this fantastic story of Farmville and Zynga. This is the CEO of Zynga. In 2006, 2007, Mark Pincus started this company in San Francisco. You can see it here in his awesome Farmville t-shirt. And they had this question: hey, we're new, we're a startup, we're going to make games, where do we go? And that every game studio has that question: do we go PlayStation, Xbox? And at the time, Facebook was emerging. And Facebook at the time, 2007, had a couple, tens of millions of users. So it was a bit of a bet. It turned out really well for Mr. Pincus, really, really well. But the question at the time was, what happens if Zynga becomes platform dependent and sort of integrates its new game with Facebook? So Zynga threw in its lot with Facebook, and for a while it went really well. And you probably have seen Farmville, and you probably have strong emotions about Farmville. I do. This is a sort of a fascinating picture. This is Farmville in a nutshell. You do stuff on the farm, and then you can post it on your wall. At the time, I don't know if you remember, it was called the wall, or now it's called the news feed. This is Ingrid. Ingrid is building their cozy tree house. Good for you, Ingrid. We're so happy for you. And if you sense deep sarcasm, you're paying attention, because a lot of users felt like me, because they get the hell away with your cozy treehouse. I don't want that in my Facebook feed. There's already enough bad stuff going on. So the relationship between Zynga and Farmville and Facebook started to get, as we say, complicated. And then this happened. Facebook was like, no, our users are not that happy with your constant bugging and all the posting on the walls. So it severed this special relationship they had, and you saw an instant decline in revenue for Zynga. It's pretty obvious, right? And then it went down and down and down and down. This revenue growth, this is growth going down. So this is this first instance of an example. What happens if a game or game studio becomes platform dependent? In our project, we started working with Brooke Duffy from Cornell. She's very interested in this question about creators or social media entertainment influencers. What happens if they become platform dependent? And it's become more fuzzy, because do you need to be on a platform to be a social media influencer or creator? Arguably, yes, but to what extent? And then it becomes instantly interesting. When we were writing the book, this happened. Of course, the pandemic happened, but early on in the pandemic, Tabitha Brown, I don't know if you know of her. She's pretty fantastic. March of last year, I was on, getting really addicted to TikTok, which I still am to this day. And Tabitha Brown started sharing these cooking videos. So she's a vegan cook. Highly recommend her if you try to eat a little bit healthier during the pandemic. And like this New York Times profile says, she has a very soothing voice, simple dishes. And you cannot leave a TikTok video unhappy after seeing it. It's just really, really good material. So she became, not Insta famous, but she became TikTok famous. And then the question becomes, to what extent is somebody like Tabitha Brown, who sort of emerged partially through TikTok and became famous, how dependent is she on that app and that platform? Because she's everywhere. She's also in mainstream outlets, which I don't have access to, like US TV shows, Instagram, but also her own blog, and she's an actress, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this question, what happens if you become platform dependent? It gets a bit more fuzzy for somebody like Tabitha Brown, because she might not get revenue through TikTok, but she might sell a boatload of cooking books. So there you get this, again, this question gets a bit fuzzy. What happens if you become platform dependent? And for news and journalism, which is Thomas Poole's expertise, it becomes even more fuzzy, because many mainstream news organizations like the Globe and Mail, are they fully platform dependent? Arguably, no. They have a subscription thing going on. You just, old school, you pay money and then you get this newspaper delivered either on paper or through a device, but then it's through a device like an iPad or an iPod or whatever, and then it's already a platform. So then we can debate how platform dependent is the Globe and Mail. And then there are other news outlets, or we can debate if BuzzFeed is a news outlet, but for the sake of the argument, they do have some news, as you can see. BuzzFeed is arguably more platform dependent. Most of their traffic comes through Facebook, Twitter, etc. And then we can start debating how platform dependent are they? Arguably more so than the Globe and Mail. So this leads to the question, some terminology. What do we mean, we the authors, when we say cultural production, and what do we mean when we say platform dependent? When we talk about platforms, we talk about these companies, GAFAM, or whatever acronym you want to use, Google, Apple, Facebook, increasingly Tencent, Alibaba. We're not interested in Uber or Airbnb. Those are different kinds of platforms. They're platform companies, but for cultural production, they're not that relevant. What do we mean when we say cultural production? organizations and individuals, like Tabitha Brown is an individual, organizations like game studios who engage in market-based cultural production, like they make money. It's an industrial form of creating cultural artifacts. So it's not your everyday user. So that's what we mean by cultural production. What we became increasingly interested in is what do we mean when we say cultural production? It's relevant to flesh out these phases of production. You create something, you distribute something, market and monetize something. And in some cases, those are collapsed, like in a TikTok clip. You create it, you distribute it, and sometimes you even monetize it sort of in one platform. But for some modes of production, that's pulled apart. And that question, when does a cultural producer becomes platform dependent, differs depending on the phase where they're at. I hope you're still with me, but I think this is one of, it sounds like pretty obvious now when I say it probably, but it took for us some thinking, how can we sort of make this more clear, but where we arrived at creation, distribution, marketing, and monetization. So then this is our argument. Our argument is that platforms, and the platforms I just talked about, and arguably online communication more generally, have long been associated for the last decade, maybe even 2 decades, with this discourse, these frames of democratization. Everybody can become a star, etc., etc. However, it remains unclear how exactly, and that's sort of our mission then, platformization or platform dependency reshapes cultural creation and distribution and marketing and monetization. So that's for us unclear. It's a process that opens up new opportunities, clearly exciting new opportunities, like Tabitha Brown came out of nowhere, to find audiences and even to generate revenue. But at the same time, there are unprecedented levels of concentration of power, mostly economic power, but also infrastructural power and political cultural power, which is a different word for governance framework, governance frameworks and sort of regulatory power among these communities or companies, sorry. So that's the argument. For some in the room, it might be helpful to give you a sense of the theory. Where are we positioned? It's already a pretty ambitious project, because if you talk about, you know, these massive industries, these big questions, this is our take, and we're very aware that people could have other takes on it, but this is ours. For us, we engage with 3 bodies of work mainly, and I'm going to really quickly give you a sense of how we interpret that and why we're engaging with these 3 bodies of works of scholarship. To do that, I want to give you a sense of sort of our mental framework. When we say platforms, we talk about these companies that bring together different kinds of users. And that sets platforms apart from different kinds of companies. And there's a lot of theory there I'm not going to go into today. But if you want to summarize this, is that platforms, we see them as aggregators of connections, of transactions, or matchmakers between users and cultural producers. And for each of the 3 examples, you can probably instantly see how that plays out, right? Facebook connects advertisers and users. The App Store, TikTok, advertisers, users, news, etc. Right? So a platform aggregates those, and we can debate where the money goes, etc. These 3 different bodies of work have different perspectives, or they have a different emphasis, what they find interesting. So first, we started getting more and more interested in business studies, or management studies, information system studies, or economics, or mainstream or orthodox economics. They tend to be primarily interested in the question of platforms, or the focus is on the platform company. So they're interested in markets and economics and infrastructures, but they're mainly interested, the focus is really on how can a platform business generate more revenue. I'm simplifying it slightly, but I would say the majority of the theory there deals with that question, the platform. Software studies is more interested in questions of infrastructure and governance. They're more focused on this relationship between the platform and the end user. questions about privacy, data, datafication, etc., data justice. So it's again a different focus, this relationship between end users and platforms. And then critical political economy, which sort of where I feel like I'm coming from, is interested in these relationship between end users and platform and cultural producers. But depending on who you ask, they might even be more interested in all the things, right? It is like social totality, social relations, history, you know, this also helps. If you throw some Marx in there, some people will be happy. This is my way of indoctrinating you. And I'm aware this is being recorded, so for legal reasons, this is a joke. So critical political economists are interested in all those relationships, but in very different ways. What do these three bodies of work then mean for our framework? We want to shift attention. We want to take all of that work into consideration very much, but have a different, slightly different focus, not so much on end users, not so much on the relationship between platforms and end users, but on the relationship between platforms and cultural producers. That's it. So we take all of that existing work into consideration, but we want to add to it, not taking away from everything that is said. So it's not a polemical approach or anything like that. It's very complementary, at least in my sense. Okay, what I want to do in the time that is sort of left is I want to talk you to three major buckets of research, like the research I've been doing with my colleagues over the last 4 or 5 years. And that breaks down into these three themes: markets and infrastructure and governance, because our argument is, if you want to understand the platformization of cultural production, you want to understand the economics, market question, you want to understand platforms as providing infrastructure, and you want to understand the rules, governance frameworks. And if you take those three together and see how they interact, then you get arguably a better sense of how platforms, if you become platform dependent, how that structures the way you do your work, creativity, etc., etc. So I'm going to talk you through these three different perspectives. First of all, as an economist or political economist, follow the money, right? That's comes sort of natural. We sort of conceptualize this as, if you become platform dependent, whether you're a TikTok star or a journalist, you have to align your business model. And we call this business model alignment. You cannot go to TikTok and say, hey, we want your money. You cannot say to Facebook, oh, we have a different idea of how to make money. If you become platform dependent in an economic sense, so we're still talking about economics, you have to align your business model, or you have to find revenue outside of the platform. Of course, that's still possible, but if you want to make money through the platform, if that's even possible at all, you have to align your business model. What does that mean in practice for cultural producers? Well, this ties back into our broader argument. Platformization and platforms make arguably increase market entry. It's easier than ever to enter a platform market, to make a TikTok clip, to make a news app, or to make a game app. Right? It's increasingly it's easier, arguably. However, the revenue that's generated through these platforms, so if you stay on these platforms and that's where you want to generate your revenue, the revenue distribution is increasingly disproportionate. We can see that with somebody like Tabitha Brown, super easy market entry. So March of last year, she starts just recording these clips. It's super authentic, right? So all these other things come into play. I don't have to talk about because it's not really my expertise, but these pictures, I hope it instantly resonate, right? She looks, very, the world's favorite mom, who doesn't instantly like, yeah, cool. And then the question, how do you then, so that's the good part, right? She has a literally new platform, but does that translate into an opportunity to make any kind of revenue, and how would that work? The question or the example of Tabitha Brown also shows the enduring relevance of what we call legacy companies, whether they're telecommunications, consumer electronics, or just the mainstream transnational media conglomerates, they're still incredibly relevant. Tabitha Brown goes on television, has these deals with publishers, which are part of these mega conglomerates. So they're not out of the picture, they just have a different relationship or different position in the media economy. And again, the story of Tabitha Brown shows that really well. We dig into the economics of this in one of our papers, where we ask the question, Canadian game production, Canadian game app production, what does the revenue distribution look like? Can you make a Canadian app for the Canadian App Store? Yes, of course. Everybody here in a couple of hours, probably, if you have a Mac device, you can make an app for the iOS App Store. The question then becomes, what are your chances, so to say, to generate any kind of meaningful revenue? Well, that's really, really hard for reasons we dig into in that paper. So this is this first perspective. And what I want to end with each of these three perspectives, this first perspective, economics, is some questions we formalized at the end of the book. So these are, this is sort of future research agenda. And in the book, what we try to do is sort of bring up these questions, not even remotely being able to answer them ourselves. So these are questions I hope some of you in the virtual room want to engage with. How do cultural producers weigh the benefits, the clear benefits of market entry, of joining a platform, against the costs, economic costs, cultural costs, social costs, of the structural uncertainty that is inherent to cultural production, but even arguably more so in platform-dependent cultural production? And what we know so little about is who are the winners and the losers in the platform economy. Right? Tabitha Brown, clear winner, but in every sense, she's the exception to the rule. A woman of color being such a success, it is really rare. I cannot emphasize that enough, because the number one TikTok star is Charli D'Amelio. Look it up and you'll instantly see, like, aha, okay, that's the number one star, a young woman. Who are the winners and losers? We just don't know enough about it. And what factors enable the winners to succeed, and how enduring is their success? Again, I wish we knew much more about this. Second perspective is on infrastructures, data. So follow the money, also follow the data. We do this through asking this question, what we call boundary resources, which is a sort of catch-all term for tools. And the tool question is emphasized, or is features heavily in the book. It's also one of those under-researched issues, I think, in cultural production, platform-dependent cultural production. But it's how do you get access to the means of production, creation, monetization, etc. Well, you do so through APIs, application programming interfaces, have computers talk to computers, software development kits, that's the tool, and associated documentation. That's what we see as platform infrastructures, and we call them boundary resources. It's not our term, so we build on the work of others, but I think this is an important question to consider. Okay, how do you access a platform market from an infrastructural perspective? For TikTok, it's easy. It's completely integrated. The platform is the infrastructure. There are very few ways around it. Sure, you can have a camera and then you upload the clip. But one of the fascinating things, of course, about some platforms, not all, but some, like TikTok, is that it's all part of the same thing. And it's incredibly, especially from an historical perspective, super advanced what you can do with TikTok. I'm still surprised. I feel old, like really old, when I use TikTok. Like, wow, look at this face filter. I have ears and you can do this. And like, I remember all this super expensive software, and as many of you probably might as well, only 5 or 10 years ago, you had to, spend hundreds of thousands of euros or guilders, wooden guilders. You get the point, right? So if you want to access platform infrastructure, you have to go through the platform. And we research that by researching APIs, SDKs, and the documentation. Super important as well. My colleague Anne Helmond from the University of Amsterdam and I wrote about this in the case of Facebook and Facebook Messenger and how that plays out. So again, the link at the beginning, You can download all these papers. The questions that emerge from this are, what exactly are the kinds of resources that platforms provide? We don't have a good grasp of that. That's the sort of a wasteland in terms of research. Who get access to it, under what conditions, and how do these conditions change over time? So some of my colleagues in Amsterdam are looking at this, but just the changes in how tools work, which tools are available, et cetera, I find it hard. And if you yourself have written about tools and SDKs and all of that, please send me your work, because this has been such a gap in our understanding. Are there alternatives? Are there non-proprietary alternatives? What would they look like? How would they work? Can they work? Should the government of Canada invest in tools so you can circumvent certain platforms, or is that a ridiculous suggestion? And how can platform infrastructures be made more legible? Like, how we need to have knowledge to access those platforms, and if you do not have that knowledge, do you disenfranchise certain people? Right? There's a sort of a massive equity question here as well. Okay, third and last major bucket. You need to make money. In order to make money, you need to access those infrastructures. And then what governance do, what we mean by governance, is if you access those tools, if you access the market, you do so under the terms and conditions set by the platform. Right? So infrastructure power, or economic power, infrastructural power, is sort of operationalized, the power there, through governance frameworks. No platform says, here, you do whatever you want with those tools. We all know this question. So, follow the rules. Most of the research when it comes to governance is focused on end users, right? Privacy questions, etc. For us, I think when we're interested in cultural production, we need to include visibility, what is visible on a platform, and discoverability. What can we find, how and when, etc. And again, TikTok is such a generative example in my mind, because it's all part of the same little thing. And I don't mean that like pejoratively, but it's a seemingly simple app. But the discoverability question and the visibility question, it's the For You page, which is algorithmically curated, which matters so much what you can and cannot see. We talk about this in this paper. This is sort of hardcore economics, strategic management. If you're a critical political economist, I know that this is recorded, so I'm not going to say that it was a deal with the devil, because it's not. I love all my co-authors equally, but it was one of the most fascinating intellectual challenges to work with my colleagues from a business school who were asking very different questions, but both of us, or the three of us, arrived at the same answers. And it is, in this paper, we looked at how governance frameworks change and how that impacts the economics of cultural production. And we both arrive at the same conclusion, that as these governance frameworks change, platforms typically do very little that benefits the whole population of cultural producers. So the winners get bigger, and sort of the losers, I don't know if you could call them losers, but they're not winners. They're left by the wayside, because these constantly changing rule sets typically do not take into account your everyday cultural producer, typically, especially if they're in certain countries or regions or from certain communities. So last slide, wrapping this up, the questions that emerge from this governmental perspective, governance. How are these platform boundaries policed? What cultural content can you make through these boundary resources? Like, how are APIs set up? How are SDKs structured? How does the structure of an API impact cultural norms? And they do, but to what extent? There is surprisingly little research on API structures and how that impacts everyday cultural production, whether on TikTok, on Facebook, on the Google Play Store, etc. What kinds of created content and services become more discoverable and more visible, and why these? And we typically tend to focus mostly on end user questions, but we should keep asking about cultural producers. And when we do, not only journalism, And yes, journalism is super important as part of the democratic process, but we should also take seriously TikTokers for a million reasons. I think this crowd would instantly agree with that. But okay, let's do the work then, right? What is prohibited and what is removed? And are there major differences? Of course, taking more of this historical view with mass media regimes of visibility. Are platforms better or worse than what the Globe and Mail did, or your TV station, or anything else like that? Okay, that's it.
Dwayne, you're muted.
Okay, I'll just say what I said there again. Thanks, Liam, for the heads up. That was terrific. As billed, now delivered. So let's open up the floor to questions. I think we're all getting used to these, these are no longer uncomfortable. You can sit for a minute, wait for somebody, finds the way to phrase the question. I'm about ready to land one in the chat box though, if anybody's, so here's one, David, for you. And it's kind of about, it goes to more to that traditional question about journalism and platform dependence. And I have a colleague friend, Miria Militel, she's Finnish and she's in New Zealand, and she studies journalism and the platformization of journalism, but she's kind of skeptical a little bit about the idea that journalists and news organizations have become excessively dependent. And she points constantly to examples, and here she's pointing to an example of one of New Zealand's largest kind of newer newspaper publishers, Stuff. And they just said, screw it, we're leaving Facebook. They didn't like the way in which they were getting broadsided by these sudden tweaks to the algorithm. And this year, it's the pivot to video, and next, couple weeks later, it's something else. And they lost control over audience data and placement of advertising and all sorts of stuff, right, that we all know about. And they decided, hell with it, we're leaving. And according to her, they're doing just fine. What do you think about this? Like, if cultural production and the media are increasingly becoming platform dependent, should they just, wake up, smell the coffee, and cut ties?
Thanks for asking this question, because it's this conversation I've had with Thomas Poole for the last 4 years now, where we went back and forth doing exactly this, like poking holes in our own argument. So initially, much of our thinking was, journalism is increasingly becoming platform dependent, but we're sort of backtracking in slow motion. We're backing out of that part, because exactly like you're saying, in the news industry, there are certain organizations which have the, however you want to say it, the power or the privilege or the capital or the means to be able to take a step back and to say, okay, we have a business model that so far still works for us, whether it's subscriptions or advertising outside of the digital advertising ecosystem, dominated clearly by Google and Facebook. So if they can sort of afford it, good for them. And this would be sort of an interesting, important data point that where we say, oh, in terms of their economics, in terms of their monetization, they may be less platform dependent. We can then debate, in terms of distribution, maybe they need Amazon Web Services. right? So increasingly we see major news organizations, Globe and Mail, Sanoma newspapers, the big ones, they host The Guardian, etc. They host their content, all of them, on Amazon Web Services. So yeah, in one phase of production, monetization, they may be less dependent. And I will be the first one to wave that flag of, yeah, good for you. You know, teach us that trick. That's good. I see that as a good thing, independence in that sense. But then let's take this, you know, bigger question, infrastructure and governance. And okay, maybe they're less dependent in terms of monetization, but how does that play out in terms of marketing and acquisition? If they're gonna market for new subscribers, how do they do that? I bet they spend way too much money on digital advertising, again, Google and Facebook. So our framework is not, our argument is not more companies are becoming more platform dependent. It's more of a question, what happens if? And then we can weigh those relationships and how they're constantly changing over time. And I think that's one of the, you know, questions like this and case studies like this make that question or the answer also much richer.
Thanks. Thank you. So we've got Rena. I see Rena has a question ready, and then Holly.
Great, thanks. Thanks for your talk, David. Nice to see you. Thanks, Dwayne, for chairing this panel. Yeah, I was just curious about cross-platform success and how you see that fitting in. When you mentioned Tabitha Brown, I couldn't help thinking about a recent episode of RuPaul's Drag Race where the wonderful Olivia Lux played Tabitha Brown in the very famous Snatch game on RuPaul. And RuPaul declared Tabitha Brown to be not famous. And RuPaul said, yeah, that she didn't know who Tabitha Brown was. And so on Twitter, that's just one platform, people went wild and said, how could RuPaul say this? Like, how could does RuPaul really not know who Tabitha Brown is? So anyhow, that example made me think about this cross-platform success. So yeah, what does that do to power or the concentration of power? Obviously, it's case dependent on the particular cultural producer, whether they require any kind of cross-platform success. But yeah, I'm just curious how you're thinking about power in relation to that. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking that. So economists have a term for this. They call it multi-homing. So this is one of those questions where our colleagues in business studies or strategic management have been grappling with this question for over 2 or 3 decades, which is very helpful for people like me, that we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel, so we can dig into that. And then they typically use, again, the game industry 20 years ago, 30 years ago, to ask this question, how platform dependent are you? You can have multiple homes, and that makes the one platform less powerful, arguably. I think part of the answer lies in, and you already sort of said it yourself as well, is in the creator economy, there seems to be an increasingly the ability and willingness to be cross-platform. And the bigger you are as a creator, like Tabitha Brown, she is like the epitome of cross-platform or multi-homing, right? She's everywhere and she can afford that. But if you're one, and I have to admit, are we still being recorded? Yes. I've never seen RuPaul's Drag Race, so this is my homework for. I know. I'm watching TikTok clips all day. I feel this is a deficiency. Okay, shame on me. I will better my life. I will do it today. But so you have Tabitha Brown. She can do it, but then the rung below, I wonder, especially if you're starting out or if you're, just a Canadian creator, do you have the ability to multi-home and the costs that come with that? And research, exploratory research, more on the labor side of or media production studies side of our field, suggest that it's really hard to multi-home because of the costs involved. Not so much money, but if you're a Twitch star, and you're twitching or streaming 12 hours per day, can you afford it to also be on Twitter, to also be doing TikTok clips? And Brooke Duffy's research seems to suggest that it's really hard. And you can also, only the big ones can do it because they have a team behind them you don't see, typically paid for by one of these legacy companies like the Disneys of our world, right? So they have these multi-channel networks, they have agents and this and that. But if you're just starting out and you're an individual creator, I think Tabitha Brown now is part of the, just above, and then she has a team and they will create content for her. But if you're below that, I mean, you know, especially creators, they need to be visible, right? There's this drive to always be visible, always be streaming. If not, if you go on vacation for 1 week, you lose like 20 or 30% of your audience. So there's this precarious nature. So if you take that all into account, yeah, for creators, we already see different sides of this. But game developers, multi-homing, the costs are even more prohibitive, right? Porting your game from one platform to the other is expensive. And the same maybe for journalists and news organizations, taking all of your data out of Amazon Web Services and to bring it to Microsoft and their Azure platform or whatever, the cloud platform. The costs of that, economic costs, are probably, you know, massive. But yeah, fantastic question. And this is, you know, it's a bit, I'm going to say this a lot more depending on the question, but this is one of the things we need to get, you know, more details on, because you know, the answer is the details of how this plays out are so important to get right.
So I see that Holly's up next, and then we have Allison, and I'll just start forming a queue. I've got a question about RuPaul myself in a bit, so don't wait too long for that.
Okay, hi. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. That was amazing. I had a question about, when you're talking about platforms, you talk about them as kind of like these connecting hubs for end users and content creators. And I was just wondering if it alters anything on platforms that are intrinsically a little bit more like real-time participatory, how those lines between viewers or end users and content creators get a little bit more blurred, and what happens when it gets a little bit more difficult to determine who's influencing the content being created. So I'm automatically thinking about things like Twitter and Twitch, where they have like a live stream audience chat that's influencing what the creator is producing in their content.
Yeah, so sort of my go-to, I feel like this is my go-to answer, or the first part of my answer will be like, in the business literature, they have this notion of side switching, right? Where you go from an end user to the producer side. And that's a meaningful switch. That's not a trivial, oh, I feel differently today switch. It has massive economic, infrastructural, etc. repercussions if you switch a side. So if you transition from just being an end user to saying, okay, today I decide I am a creator, that has, because that's how you do it, right? If you wake up in the morning, today is the day I'm going to be Insta famous. I think what platforms, companies try to do in their communication and their governance framework and their discourse is to keep that line super blurry and to keep it fuzzy and to sort of say, you know, it doesn't matter what you really are, and to keep this nebulous, right? And Brooke Duffy talks about that in terms of aspiration and aspirational labor. Like all those creators, not all of them, but a lot of creators go onto these platforms and they aspire to be stars. And it feels like, oh, you can just, it's just within reach. And you see that in the game industry as well. I don't think you see it that much in journalism. Maybe journalists are a different breed, but so yeah, that's the fascinating thing about these platforms, right? You can do side switching in an instance, but when you do, it's not as trivial as it sounds, right? You sort of know it when you do it, like cheating on an exam. We all know it when you do it. So it's once you become a creator or a cultural producer, you don't do it for a week typically, right? You say, you know, I quit school and now I'm going to be a creator. And if it's not that, then you're just an end user who's a political economist would say, whose value, whose data, whose attention, whose free labor is being commodified. Right? So then for platforms, you know, thank you for the attention, thank you for the data, but you're not interesting to us. And you know, for us, I think it's important to sort of demystify that fuzziness, because on places like TikTok, when do you become a cultural producer? If I tomorrow make a TikTok video and I get 1 million views, then I might get an email. I've heard these stories, but these are just, you know, it's all very anecdotal. Hey, David, wow, 1 million views of your awesome cat videos on the TikTokis. Do you want to be part of our partner program thing? Right, and then things start to happen. But when do they decide that? What does that mean for me? And especially, you know, those moments where a platform says, okay, now we're institutionalizing you. You become, from an institutional perspective, economically, infrastructurally, you're not just a user. You know, David the cat, awesome person, and now you're it. Most of the time, those are, you know, it becomes really tangible and explicit, and it's less fuzzy.
Okay, so Allison up next, and then we've got Maddie. So.
Hi, thanks so much for that. Actually, my question kind of relates to what you were just saying, Holly, but just from the different side. You're talking about how the live chat might influence the content of cultural production. And I'm a little bit interested, I think, like autonomy in cultural production. I don't know that I don't know that there's ever been like total autonomy for content producers and cultural production. But I'm interested in what new challenges to autonomy for cultural producers, be they large companies or individual creators, what kind of new challenges to autonomy for them are created or are facing them in the context of platform dependency and platform ecosystems.
Yeah, great. So the whole second half of the book talks about autonomy in terms of labor, autonomy in terms of creativity. You know, this age-old debate of creativity versus commerce. You're probably very aware of that debate, right? And autonomy in terms of, or the question of democracy, which is this, you know, it's an ambitious book. And luckily I'm helped by 2 co-authors. So there are 2 parts I can sort of quickly speak to. Is one of them is autonomy in terms of economic autonomy, of course, because that's where my mind instantly goes to as the sort of the economist on the team. How sustainable is your business? How sustainable are these business models? And I would say that, you know, they are not sustainable at all. They are sustainable if you're a winner, but if you are a winner, you're a big winner, but everything below that, that labor is so uncertain, so precarious. And even the people who make a decent living, they constantly are afraid, what I just talked about, that if they're not streaming for a day, they might get, you know, a drop in subscribers, a drop in revenue. And, you know, the other autonomy question is, of course, visibility and governance frameworks. One of the chapters talks about the adpocalypse, the YouTube adpocalypse, which is about a moment in time when YouTube decided, hey, there is content that people find offensive. And of course, YouTube decides what offensive is. And we're going to demonetize certain channels and certain creators. And if you're familiar with this story, you know, guess who those creators are. They're not PewDiePie. They're not, you know, these game bros like, ooh, look at us. No, they're people, you know, that use certain words or from certain backgrounds that look a certain way, that talk a certain way, or even use a word like, there's a game called Assassin's Creed. think it's made in Montreal. No, you cannot say Assassin's Creed because it has ass in it. Like, oh my goodness, is that what we have become to? And of course, these are anecdotal, but this happens like a million times over. So if we talk about autonomy, for me, it's this economic question, and economic sustainability is really hard to achieve. And that then plays out, has massive repercussions in terms of labor and creativity and democracy. The last thing in terms of autonomy that Brooke has been very fierce on is this question of harassment as well, because you could become much more visible, but we've seen even over the last couple of days, platforms force that visibility on you in a way through their business models, typically. But with visibility comes so many opportunities for harassment if you dabble in certain content categories, and for no reason other than, and we all know why this happens, and who the attackers are, etc. But this harassment question typically is talked about in terms of end users, and we should talk about it, and we should never stop talking about it. But for cultural producers, it's their livelihood, which is pretty profound. So with that visibility becomes sort of these massive questions of, I see that as an autonomy question as well. And I don't think platforms, Google, how Google has been acting, even with their AI team, I think most of us are very aware of what's happening there. If they cannot get their internal stuff right, I have little faith that they are protecting of creator and creator cultures.
Okay, Maddie, you're up.
Thanks, David. It's so nice to hear about someone else's crippling addiction to TikTok, and I know that I'm not alone. And luckily, I've been able to work it into some research on the Ratatouille, the musical phenomenon, which led me to thinking about kind of your research and its accessibility to youth, who are a large majority of the cultural producers, especially on apps like TikTok, which, have grown in audience, like age demographics, but, is mostly a Gen Z and young millennial app, or so I say myself, with whatever algorithm they've put up upon me. So how would you make kind of your research and your concerns about the safety and precarious situations of employment through cultural production, like readily available to youth who are then entering this field? Because traditional jobs and employments are also, so few and far between. I'm just interested in kind of the youth demographic and that aspect.
Yeah, this is one of those things like I wish I had done some work so I could now say, no, I've done work on this, and show you the receipts. No, I think this is one of the most important issues for us media scholars, and we've been talking and thinking about it, but sort of we have this inclination, or just speaking for myself, I have, in terms of thinking in institutional terms, right? Game studios, and I'm a former journalist, so I think about news organizations. But we have a whole generation, our students, my students. I sometimes do not think that they have a good sense of what it means to become a creator. And I don't want to talk about them like, oh, they're not being aware, or they're not smart about it. It's just, it's such a complex ecosystem that's constantly changing, that they might not, I don't think they always have a good grasp what it means. And then they come to, I don't know, you might have those conversations like, oh, I have 10,000 subscribers. I think I'm gonna try. I'm gonna be a YouTuber. And I don't want to be, that professor, and sort of killing all the dreams of all the students. I don't want to be that guy. But yeah, I don't, as you notice by now, I don't have a good answer to that. But it's something to put in our future research agenda. We're starting with a short knowledge synthesis grant, where this is a part of how can we as scholars do more outreach without killing dreams of our students, because that's not our business either. To say, okay, this is what's going to happen realistically, and not do it in a way where saying, okay, what you're doing is just like stupid or a waste of time, because it's not. If I see what my students are doing on TikTok, and I made them make TikTok clips to feed in my addiction for course points even, was fantastic. It's so much comes out of it, but it's this balance between just statistically the chance of any of my students making it are very low, and even if they're gonna start making some money, it will be an incredible hellish ride. But that goes for everybody who works in the cultural industries, right? So yeah, part of the answer is in a kind way, tell them that it's going to be rough.
Okay. Liam now has a question for you, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. That was really great. Super interesting, just in so many ways. So I have two questions. The first one is half serious, but I am kind of interested in what your answer would be to this, which is, does it make sense to think of Amazon at this point as a platform, or is it more a real estate baron? And is Amazon a harbinger of where all platforms are going? And so that question of land is something that I'm just interested to, like, the intersection of platforms and land. And then my second question has to do with like where form fits in all of this, like in your kind of scheme, or maybe affordances, because so much of what matters to content creators and users are the like formal possibilities of each platform, right? Which has a lot to do with like how they migrate from platform to platform. So, and I ask that not to overemphasize content, but because I think form allows us to consider things like the temporality of the TikTok feed versus the Twitter feed, how devices kind of interact with bodies and movement and things like that. So I'm just interested like where form fits into your model or into the different buckets. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So is Amazon a platform? So what we've been trying to do, and this is mostly informed by my work with Anne Helmond, who is sort of this software scholar, internet studies scholar, who has such a good grasp of sort of this the internet software side of it, is like Amazon is a conglomerate. And what we've been trying to do in the book is to provide a little bit more specificity to when we talk about platforms, what are we talking about? And to say, we shouldn't talk about platforms, we should talk about platform companies that operate platform subsidiaries. And each of those subsidiaries is a platform market in and by itself, right? So Facebook Messenger, the app, is a platform market. Instagram is a platform market. WhatsApp, and they're part of the bigger Facebook conglomerate. So Facebook is not a platform, it's a data infrastructure. And so that's our way to talk about subsidiaries and instances, to get a better way to talk about these mega entities, to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. We say, Amazon does this, Amazon does that, this what this means, this what that means. Okay, it depends very much, like you're saying, what are you talking about? Because if you talk about land, you're talking about either Amazon Web Services, the cloud hosting component, or the warehousing e-commerce part. But then when we talk about Amazon Video, it's a completely different kind of thing. And when we talk about Twitch, Twitch is a subsidiary and also a multi-sided market thing. It's different again. Right, so yeah, Amazon is sort of like the Walmart, or the most fascinating thing about Amazon and these kinds of companies, I think, is that we've had monopolies in the past. And increasingly, this is my, for the next 2 years, I want to read more about the monopolies of the past and how they operated, like how companies like Walmart, AT&T, and even the trains and the telegraph and the railroads, all of those, how they came into being and what happened there, and then to see how that plays out with Amazon. Is Amazon that much different, worse, better than the past? The question of form and affordances, we try to understand it through the question of those tools and boundary resources. So if you're asking me questions about content, it's not that I'm not interested in content, I'm deeply interested in content, but if I want to understand how a platform impacts what kinds of content can and cannot be made, I'm mostly interested in that question of what kind of tools and APIs, software development kits, and documentation governance frameworks does a platform provide, and how does that not so much determine, of course not, but bracket, afford, shape certain ways. And one of the parts of the book talks also about how cultural producers are always gaming the system. They're always negotiating, as we all know, right? Media scholars, we're very aware that it's not, oh, here you have a tool and they'll do exactly with that tool what you want. No, of course not, right? So cultural producers are going to poke, they're going to hack, they're going to mod it, etc. And again, for us, we're all very aware of those issues, and our scholarship might be informed by that or even about that. So we try to bring that in again and say, okay, yeah, we have histories of people trying to, break the system, break the tool. And that's also, I think, in our work or my work, the most interesting. That's why it happens. Artists and students and hackers are the most interesting people, of course.
Excellent. So Blue has a question for you.
Thank you, Dwayne. And thank you very much for the stimulating talk, David. I have 2 questions. So you said platform is providing infrastructures and it's important to understand the rules of governance framework. So one of the important infrastructure is telecom. And when you said that it's a good thing that one of the news agencies doing just talk about can be independent as long as they can afford it. And you are saying, basically you are saying that not everyone can afford it. A lot of people cannot. And especially when this independent agency is trying to do advertising or marketing, then they will need to spend more money if they are not using the platform. Okay, so but a lot of people cannot even afford internet. So, and when we talk about the governance of big platform, big technology corporations, the debate about the corporate powers in the internet age, we rarely talk about telecom. And telecom holds the key to the internet itself and millions of Canadians and peoples over the world. They have the power over the content and channels, online and offline. I'm wondering, have you thought about the role that telecom play when we reimagine the meaningful self-governance of platform? That's one. Another one is you talked about the idea of winner and the losers. And you're saying that once the law and the policy change, the platform rarely take care of the entire nation. That's great. Not the fact it's great, but like the idea that you want to imagine a way that we can take care of the whole nation is great. But that's also very ambitious. I like ambitious people. I like ambitious projects. But also, I'm wondering, how can we be our own governor in the age of big data, machine learning, and the private control of the public sphere? How can the law change? How the law needs to change in order to ensure the citizens have the information they need in order to make democracy work and make it work for them? And how can we take off everyone? Because like break it down that everyone would have different interests. And like all of us sitting here, that we have common interests, but we also have different priorities. Everyone have different priorities they want to prioritize. So how can we make it work?
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So I haven't been nervous up until this exact moment when you said telecom, because I'm sort of coming behind, and the book project had some delays, and one of the delays, can academic writing ever be delayed? But deadlines are a construct. That's when Dwayne came in, sort of read some of our work and started saying, "Hey, what about the history of telecommunications?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's a gap in my understanding. That's a gap in my knowledge." So we've tried our best to bring that part of the argument more front and center. And the more I read about it, it depends so much on the industry. For certain industries, it doesn't matter. The telecommunication question is just another variable in a big sea of stuff that's happening. But your average TikToker, yeah, sure, they need good internet connectivity, but only, so that's it. So then telecommunication policy arguably is not front and center. But for certain other industries, it's a super important question. For example, this question of hosting was an interesting thing we grappled with. The Guardian, like I talked about The Guardian before, the British newspaper has global ambitions, but they can only operate at a global scale with the help of Amazon Web Services. Right? For the Guardian to make an infrastructure, just servers that can be accessible in North America, but also other parts of the world where you have low latency, where you can track all the data of all the things all the people are doing, they don't have the means to do that. So they can only do that through these 1, 2, 3, like Microsoft, Amazon, maybe Alibaba. And one of the Chinese cloud hosting platforms, right? So that's, can you still operate at a global scale without those hosting platforms? And then telecommunications becomes a big part of that debate. About winners and losers. When I first came to Canada, like 5 years ago, I was struck by this notion of CanCon. And I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Because I want to understand Canada better, right? When you come to a new country, you immigrate, and you're like, what does it mean to be Canadian? And I want to be like you, and you seem so cool. Sorry, right? So I was in it to win it, and I was like, oh, this CanCon thing is, show me those Canadian TV shows, show me Canadian TikTok, and all of that stuff. But what I found surprised me is that over the last couple of years, I haven't heard that word a whole lot in my conversations with platform scholars and with Canadian media scholars. So, how does the CanCon conversation, I'm very aware that there are people listening right now who want to probably virtually assassinate me because I might not understand the nuances of that historical trajectory of that policy. But what I took away from it was like, there is this inclination to at least support local creator communities and local cultures of production. And I think that's a fantastic idea. Coming from a culture, from a country where, there are only 20 million people speaking Dutch. And if you hear us speak, you're like, oh, that's a good thing, because it's a horrible language to listen to. But, if you hear Dutch people speak, it's a lot of with a lot of English, because our media diet is so much influenced or impacted by US TV shows and English speaking content. So this is a long way of saying, I wish those debates about supporting local cultures of production would be reactivated, and the government, the federal government or provincial government, would be much more forceful and fierce on it, and you know, go to battle with like the French and the Germans, especially the French, seem to do. Like this willingness to support, whether it's language-based or anything else. I hope that conversation comes back again. I haven't seen it enough for my own personal taste, but I would love to be corrected on any of this, because this is the set. You asked two questions that make me very nervous. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and lean in with, you know, something of a, maybe a bit of a monologue that'll end up in like 2 or 3 questions. Like I just find talking with David and listening to David and reading David's stuff, it's like my mind just like explodes with like questions. And so, and points of opposition too, and, you know, debate. And that's good, because David and I have sat, you know, across one another, like face to face, and we've done this on the phone, we've done it through emails. And so it's great. You know, on the CanCon stuff, just a quick aside, and then I'll turn to something more interesting. One, if you want to, you know, the problem with the CanCon stuff is that it's a narrow kind of industrialized, invested conception of culture that hijacks the totality of what culture means. And right now it is actually back in full force, and it threatens to hijack the future of communication, culture, and media policy in an age in which mobile phones and the internet are ever more centric. And to my point in mind, you've got backwards looking protectionist interests set to hijack the entire world to kind of thread, you know, a camel through a needle. It's completely what's anachronistic. And these guys don't give a damn about honesty and debate or rational discourse. And if you can't do any of that and you want me to sign up for your culture policy agenda, forget it. Okay, anyway, that's where I'm thinking. If you want to see where this is taking place, go listen to the debates over Bill C10 right now. You know, which on its face, if they want to bring Netflix under the regulatory authority of the CRTC and a revised audiovisual media directive, hey, I'm all for that. I think that's absolutely fine. No truck nor trade for the idea that because it's on the internet, it's not regulable. I think that's just complete BS. But these guys want to regulate the internet as if it's 1970 and the broadcasting thing, and Toronto's the center of the universe. And to them, I say, bugger off.
Wow.
Okay. So anyway, there's a diatribe. Now I'll go to, I got 2 or 3 other things here. You know, one, let me go to the really good stuff. Like, I love the boundary resources idea, you know, and like how tidy that is. It's like, you know, follow the data, then look at the SDKs, you know, look at the APIs and then the associated documentation. I mean, there's such a clear and concise, you know, way of conceptualizing a good chunk of your methodological toolbox, right? And I think that's great. And then, I mean, is it proper? Because I think last term when I taught some of your stuff in the Comtech and Society course, and many people here were in it, I used Amsterdam School as shorthand for a kind of a distinctive approach to platform studies. Are you okay with that? Like,
yes. Yeah. I mean, yes. The first time you cannot call yourself a school. Well, you can, but it's like, that's awkward. That's weird. But somebody else said that, right? The Amsterdam School of Critical Platform Studies, and we didn't pay him any money that I know of. I was like, I'll take it. I think there is a clear, coherent, what Amsterdam does is it has these 2 parts. It has the Digital Methods Institute initiative, people like Professor Richard Rogers, who is deep in that part, DMI, digital methods, and Helmond grew up in that, as did I, with that digital method sensitivity. But then there are people like José van Dijk, Professor van Dijk, who's my mentor. She was my PhD supervisor. And so she and Richard are sort of like hardcore digital methods, and José is much more, cultural, STS, political economy. So they exist in the same universe very well. And that's how you, I think, get a very distinctive, I would say the Amsterdam School of Platform Studies is therefore a thing influenced by not just them, but that way of thinking. Being now in Canada, I also see the limitations of some of that work, as every school, of every approach, or every group of thinkers, right? So they're definitely, I'm not going to say what those limitations are, not today, but there are parts where when I came to Canada, and being part of U of T and Canadian intellectual climate, that there are parts of our conversations, sometimes it is very much focused on, on an API structure or a tool, and other sort of more cultural questions or social cultural questions are sometimes, they're not deemed irrelevant, of course not, but they're not investigated. I'm completely fine with that. But that's, that's our job, right? If we stop asking questions, then.
So here, let me then, I'll try to make the last little bit, and I want to, my last bit, I'll bring RuPaul in for everybody to see what that might look like, right? But on the, like, one of the things I like about the boundary resources is I think this is a really fertile spot for someone like myself. And then you heard Blue earlier talk about telecoms, God bless her. I think it's around around these boundary resources that we can come together, because my argument would be that these are really useful and a nice, concise bit of tools. But if we look back, not just the 30 or 40 years of information and computer sciences history to pull these out, but we can look back over a century to find parallel notions of technical resources that have been at the heart of network interconnectivity and interoperability and device interconnection and interoperability, and that those network and device interoperability became the means by which telecommunications were the platform infrastructure for the film industry, for the broadcasting industry. Recorded music came out of competition between the giant telegraph and telephone industries in the 1870s. We saw the industrialization of research and development form in the 1880s under Edison Labs and what became Bell Labs. And that was all because of competition between telegraphs and telephones. So there's my monologue. Now here's a question, and here's RuPaul. So I've been in contact, as this CanCon stuff heats up, with somebody, the person who is the CEO for Out TV, so the LGBTQ themed television service here in Canada. And for him, he is finding Amazon and Apple, they are a lifeline for him and his company, as they are strangled by the vertically integrated telecoms operators here in Canada, and as they seek to enter international markets. And he's been able to bring Out TV to Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and a number of countries around the world because of the relationship he's had with Amazon. And you ask him, and he says, Amazon gives you such a better deal in terms of just money, but also back end insight into your audiences and all sorts of data, stuff that you would never, ever, ever get from the kind of industry that you have there. So he sees not platform dependency, okay, although he recognizes that, right? He's not naive, right? but relative to what he's been used to now for 15 years as he tried to carve out a niche for already, a gay themed channel is not the one that's going to be the easiest sell to a regulator, right? So they have provided him with this amazing opportunity within this country and internationally, and they've used it to discipline the cartel here in Canada. What would you say about that?
Yeah, what I would say is Amazon is, I go back to the previous comment, is Amazon is a conglomerate, right? So you're probably talking about Amazon Video, which is
it's the Amazon where that they actually operate like kind of virtual cable system where they aggregate channels. So if you look at Amazon's video operations, you got Amazon Prime, which is basically a catalog of titles, and it competes with Netflix and Crave and all that. But then they also serve as a platform in which they aggregate channels, right?
Yeah. So my answer would be, first of all, I would not be saying every single thing Amazon does is evil and it's like a uniform company with a uniform policy. No, I wouldn't refute anything you're saying in terms of Amazon funding productions that might be outside of what you just said, but better. On the other hand, if I look at companies like Apple and maybe even Facebook and Google, on the one hand, yeah, some of their television production outfits might be much more progressive, absolutely. But what they want on the one hand give, they on the other hand take away. If we look at regular or governance frameworks on YouTube, if you look at the research how LGBTQ folks are treated on YouTube and the YouTube algorithms, or TikTok, with the scholarship on Black TikTok and the appropriation of, it doesn't make, it's just simply bad. So on the one hand, yes, these mega companies, some of their subsidiaries might have different policies and different incentives, but then on the other hand, they might have, especially YouTube, the scholarship I've been reading on YouTube governance and TikTok and all that. It's like, that can coexist, because it's the same thing with The Simpsons and Fox News. It used to be on the same corporate, Fox or News Corp. They can coexist, and what's, again, The Simpsons and Fox News, right? It cannot be more opposed. So I don't see those things as mutually exclusive. If they're more progressive in their TV production stuff, fantastic. But I wish that they also translated, like in somewhere in the book we say most of the governance frameworks of algorithmically driven, advertising driven platforms tend to be very conservative. I think YouTube in their politics, TikTok, etc., are instinctively conservative. And we've seen that every month, every year, over and over again, how it hurts people we deeply care about and are close to us, especially in a country like Canada.
David, it's at 4:30, but we have a colleague here, Marilena Lim, who would like to ask you a question. So I say we extend the time frame just a little bit to bring Marilena's question into the tent, give you a chance to answer that, and then we'll turn it over to Liam. Okay, so let's just try to keep it within, let's just say 5 minutes, if everybody will indulge me in expanding this part 5 minutes, and then turn it to Liam. We okay with that, Blue and others who are the bosses? Yeah. Okay, good.
Thank you, Dwayne. I was raising my hand for like 12 minutes.
Oh,
So it was a long time.
Sorry, Marilena, I was not ignoring
It's okay.
you.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you, David, for that great talk. I felt I had to ask question because we were from Dutch school. It's like I graduated from Enschede, SDS. Van Dyke was in my committee. my reader. Anyway, so I appreciate that you brought 3 different fields: software study, business studies, political economy into I think, I think I really appreciate your approach. And I'm gonna ask something about algorithms, but not quite the way it is being studied as a sort of like within software studies. So I don't really know what field is this that I'm talking about, but I'm kind of like asking you how, what do you think about this? So recently I was researching the evolution of Facebook algorithms because I was in the midst of writing about algorithm and affect. And I found out from 2007 to 2019, every single key moments, there is one thing that stay. You have changes that you cannot see, obviously, right? Because they are not very transparent. It is invisible. But what you can see is like big moments, the very logic, the core why the algorithm was changed or improved, and the way cultural producers see the change, which for me is more important rather than the actual modification within the algorithm. And the words so it was like the invention of like buttons, the weight, 2017 reaction are weight more than likes, right? 2015 introduction of zippers feature. So all of this is actually about affect, which is like, oh, how to gain attention within from 30 seconds now is like down to 3 seconds probably, right? And this is become like the basis in which cultural producer, journalists trying to curate their content. So, and I'm always interested in historiography of technology because it explains so much, right? And the interpretation of the changes. And I'm wondering, where do you see this? Because I think, yes, I agree with you, the whole platformization. But this is a particular logic that was big, of course, even before, right? We learned that boy like blue and pink is for girls. That's all about affect. It's not about reality, but how affect being built within algorithm to monetize more, basically, right? Of course, it's about traffic, but within the core logic is how to control affect.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, how do you see this evolution, and how all simplification and everything else that being tailored around this is actually have impact on the way cultural production, also user, right, deal with their content and deal with their production and consumption.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So if you're interested in the economic side of this question, if you follow the link on the slide of my presentation, one of the papers is this economic paper where we really go into depth in the economic impact of what we call platform evolution from a governance perspective, and how governance changes. Platforms constantly evolve, as do their governance frameworks, and how does that impact economically cultural producers? So there's a lot to say, and it's a very complex question, but we have some answers. In the book, we talk about it in terms of editorial or sort of manual governance and computational. And it's not always a given that all platforms are always sort of computational algorithms, right? They're not just, there are platforms like Spotify that employ hundreds or thousands of people that curate material. So it's not either or. Sometimes it's both. The answer to most of this is precarity, right? So there's increased precarity economically, There's what we call algorithmic precarity, and others have talked about this as well, where people trying to understand the algorithm and game the algorithm and reverse engineer the algorithm. And there's sort of creative precarity in terms of you're constantly trying to, what is the algorithm doing, whether it's editorial or computational or person or rogue piece of code, whatever. So it increases precarity. It has done so in the past because mass media has always been moderating and curating, etc. We would argue that there is a massive increase in that uncertainty and the power asymmetry in platform-dependent cultural production. So I think that's the short answer. I should end with sort of that call for future research, because we talk a lot about algorithms. There's fantastic scholarship on it, but cultural producers are typically left out of those conversations. And I think if you want to have a good sense of just the media landscape, not just because about money and the media economy, but also, everyday cultural life, cultural producers are increasingly a part of it. So we cannot have good, wholesome conversations about everyday life on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc., without taking into account cultural production, who get a say, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Sorry here, I'm trying to be smart and mute myself, but excellent. I mean, let me just say once again, what a pleasure it's been to have David here, to bring this kind of fount of wisdom and experience on really, kind of leading edges of the development of a new approach in the field that's proving extremely valuable. I think we're really honored to have him. I want to give also a great big applause and shout out to the organizers of the conference for being so bold and to go to David and get him to come. So thanks a lot, David. Thank you very, very much for a really, really great talk and engagement with everybody afterwards. So thank you. So we're going to now turn the table over to our colleague, Liam Young, who's going to bring us home. So Liam, yours to bring
Thanks,
home.
Dwayne. And thanks, David, again, for a really great talk and discussion afterwards. So we were going to do this in a different room, but it just makes sense to do it here, I think, because we're all here. So let me just pull up my remarks so I don't forget anything that I'm supposed to say. So my name is Liam Young. I'm faculty in the comms program. I have been the faculty liaison for this conference. So I'm really glad to be here to help close out this really, I think, wonderful 2 days of ideas and conversation. Online conferencing poses a unique set of challenges that none of us were prepared for 1 year ago. But I think the quality of intellectual exchange, which we've just been present for over the last hour and a half and throughout the 2 days, and also the overall just kind of vibe of care and solidarity among all of you, I think has just been so impressive. So thanks for that. It's offered us, and I think I speak for many of my colleagues here, it's given a kind of welcome boost of energy that I hope will help propel us through these last few weeks of term. So again, thanks to all of you for that. So just in reflecting on this event this afternoon, I think perhaps the most exciting thing for me has been the feeling that all of you are thinking this historical moment, like this moment that is comprised by the many rapid transitions your papers are tracing across a range of media and communicative practices, procedures, platforms, relations, and sites, that you're thinking these things on the fly and you're thinking them together. So we've seen 2 days of work that has theorized and historicized and improvised, which has understood the need to collaborate, to take chances, and to think expansively. And this is challenging work, but it seems to be what this moment demands of us. And there's been a real energy, I think, produced by your willingness to do this kind of work. So I hope this energy will reverberate among all of us in the weeks and months and years to come. So thanks for that. At this moment, I'm just gonna thank David again and our other keynote speaker, Paul Taylor, for these two wonderful keynote addresses that have helped us to think about this kind of work. I think they were two just kind of beautiful opening and closing notes for the overall proceedings. The talks have been recorded, so you can catch up with them soon on the Communication and Media Studies program YouTube page. The organizing committee has additionally asked me to reiterate its thanks to a few folks, so bear with me, trying not to do too much of a list of names at the end of 2 days, but I don't want to forget anybody. So Roger Martin for technical support, Melanie LeBlanc, Laura Garreau, Josh Greenberg, and everyone in the comms administrative suite for their guidance and support. All of my faculty colleagues for attending and chairing the panels, Dean O'Neill and the Office of the Dean FPA for including the event in the FPA research series, and then for additional financial support, the Communication and Media Studies program, the Office of the Associate Vice President Teaching and Learning, the Canadian Journal of Communication, and the Carleton Graduate Students Association. The GSA has generously funded a CGC book fund. So the organizers have done a raffle draw for some gift cards. The winners of those will be contacted afterwards. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read out all the names, but keep an eye on your inbox in case you were one of the lucky group. Shout out to the Communication Graduate Caucus for continuing to produce what is clearly the field's best graduate student conference in Canada. Another year in the books. Kudos to all of you. And then most importantly, on behalf of the entire conference delegation, I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizing team. We've been singing your praises over the 2 days, but it's really well earned. Holly Tyson, Maddie Warlow, Britt Greening, and the heroic Blue Malren Dong, who literally fought through fever and illness in the week running up to the conference, but was the rock of the entire proceedings. In my role as liaison, I got to observe this group meet every challenge thrown their way, and there were many. Everything from high-level questions about how to figure out a theme befitting of this moment, the knowledge that everyone's working on limited bandwidth, to the more granular details that none of us could anticipate about, like Zoom meeting room IDs, raise hand features, waiting rooms, all of this kind of stuff. So we've all benefited from their tireless efforts, and the result was an event that was stimulating, ambitious, but also inclusive and collegial. So, another virtual round of applause for all of them. Okay, so now on to the task at hand. It's my great pleasure to announce this year's winner of the Canadian Journal of Communication Student Paper Prize. This is an award that recognizes groundbreaking work done by an emerging scholar in communication and media studies. So we had a number of very strong submissions this year, each of which were double-blind reviewed by faculty members in our program. I'd like to thank our reviewers, and I shall do so using a technique developed by my predecessor in this role. So I'm going to thank them by listing them in the order in which they filed their reviews. Benjamin Wu, Chris Russell, Sandra Robinson, Hannah Dick, Tracy Lorio, Ross Eamon, Cheryl Hamilton, Andre Turcotte, and Dwayne Winzek. Thanks to all of you for your work. So now the main event. So this year's excellent winning submission is a paper that analyzes complex intersections between platform design, economic imperatives, self-branding, and promotional culture. In the words of one reviewer, the paper offers a clear and cogent critique of Microsoft's business-centric social media platform, LinkedIn. This critique positions LinkedIn as a labor market intermediary that incentivizes users to articulate themselves as what James Paul G terms shape-shifting portfolio persons. The author's emphasis on these portfolio selves, another reviewer notes, cuts to the heart of questions about changing subjectivities in the age of platforms. In addition to its compelling argument, reviewers also noted that the paper is highly readable, offers a deep engagement with a wide body of literature, and shows skill in its conception and execution. Please join me in congratulating the winner of this year's CJC Student Paper Prize, Catherine Jeffrey from Simon Fraser University, for their paper, Shape-Shifting Portfolio Platform People, Self-Branding, and Platform Subjectivities. So I took a look at the user list. I'm not sure if Catherine is here with us, but if you are and you feel like you'd like to say anything, feel free, but also feel free to just accept the award. And okay. All right. So the last thing, I have been tasked with asking you to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable. The organizers would like to take a group screen cap. So we'll do that in a second. And they told me that they didn't have anything further to say, but this has been their show and I don't quite feel right about being the one to bid you all adieu. So I'd like to, at the risk of putting them on the spot, I'd like to invite one of Blue, Holly, Maddie, or Britt to provide us with the last word.
Well, we just really want to thank everyone here and in every single one of the panels. We love you, and we didn't make this happen. You made this happen, literally. And this is the photo time. So put on the big smile and let's do it. Okay, and in case my colleagues want to say something. So this Zoom awkward silent moment is really hard.
You unmute. No, you unmute.
Yeah, no, I think Blue summed it up pretty well. Thank you to everybody again. Like, it was a really interesting experience planning from abroad, but it was amazing. It was way better than we expected.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and reiterate what Liam said about kind of feeling refreshed and excited again about research, kind of in a lull of the season and a difficult time for everyone. It's really, especially with our keynote, Paul Taylor and David Nieborg. Sorry, I pronounced your last name probably wrong. Okay, good. So thank you everyone for that like reinvigoration of spirit through this conference the past 2 days.
Well, I suppose I can't be the only one who doesn't talk. So I feel like most of it has been said. It feels as though the conference came together by magic in a way. Like we've put in so much work, and yet to see it all sort of play out over the course of 2 days is better than we ever could have imagined. And so we really appreciate everybody coming together and contributing so wholeheartedly to the event. It wouldn't have been possible without everybody else. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Woo-hoo. So the picture is all taken and it will be shared on our Zoom account. No, Twitter account, sorry. Thank you very much for everyone, and have a good dinner. Good night. Bye.